Would you raise your hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you please state your full name?
I'm Jeffrey Edward Epstein, and my residence address is 6100 Red Hook Boulevard in Virgin Islands.
Do you maintain any other residences presently?
I have vacation homes in New Mexico, Palm Beach, New York, and Paris.
Have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Yes.
What was the crime of which you were convicted?
Two counts, one soliciting prostitution and procuring a minor for prostitution.
Did you in fact commit those acts?
I'm going to invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
How many times have you solicited a minor for prostitution?
Same answer.
How many times have you solicited a minor for prostitution in the state of Florida?
Same answer.
Have you ever solicited a minor for prostitution in the Virgin Islands?
Same answer.
That is, you are invoking your Fifth Amendment,
yes, sir.
right?
Yes, Mr. Scroll.
Have you ever solicited for prostitution in New York?
Same answer.
Have you ever solicited for prostitution in New Mexico?
Same answer.
Have you ever solicited for prostitution in Paris?
Same answer.
Have you ever solicited a minor for prostitution anywhere at any time?
Again, I'm going to assert my right.
On January 20, 1953, Jeffrey Epstein was born in Brooklyn, New York City. His parents, Pauline and Seymour Epstein, were Jewish, and they had married in 1952, shortly before his birth. Pauline worked as a school aide and was a homemaker. Seymour Epstein worked for the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation as a groundskeeper and gardener. Jeffrey was the oldest of two siblings. He and his brother Mark grew up in the working-class neighborhood of Seagate, a private gated community in Coney Island, Brooklyn. Epstein attended local public schools, first attending Public School 188 and then Mark Twain Junior High School nearby. In 1967, Epstein attended the National Music Camp at the Interlochen Center for the Arts. He began playing the piano when he was 5. He graduated in 1969 from Lafayette High School, having skipped 2 grades. Later that year, he attended classes at Cooper Union for physics until he changed colleges in 1971 and attended the Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences at New York University, but left without receiving a degree in June of 1974. Epstein started working in September of 1974 as a physics and mathematics teacher for teens at the Dalton School on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. David Barr, who served as the headmaster until June 1974, was known to have made several unconventional recruitments at the time, although it is unclear whether he had a direct role in hiring Epstein. 3 months after Barr's departure, Epstein began to teach at the school despite his lack of credentials. He allegedly showed inappropriate behavior toward underage students at this time, and later became acquainted with Allen Greenberg, the chief executive officer of Bear Stearns, whose son and daughter were attending the school. Greenberg's daughter, Lynn Koppel, pointed to a parent-teacher conference where Epstein influenced another Dalton parent into advancing for him to Greenberg. In June of 1976, after Epstein was dismissed from Dalton for poor performance, Greenberg offered him a job at Bear Stearns. Epstein would join Bear Stearns in 1976 as a low-level junior assistant to a floor trader. He swiftly moved up to become an options trader, working in the special products division, and then advised the bank's wealthiest clients, such as Seagram president Edgar Brofman, on tax mitigation strategies. Jim Kane, the bank's later chief executive officer, praised Epstein's skill with wealthy clients in complex products. And in 1980, 4 years after joining Bear Stearns, Epstein became a limited partner of the company. According to Bloomberg News, in an article, Epstein was a fine worker, and he enjoyed working around with other people who were like-minded. In 1981, he was asked to leave Bear Stearns for, according to his sworn testimony, being guilty of a Reg D violation. Reg D violations in the United States under the Securities Act of 1983, any offer to sell securities must either be registered. However, he was not registered. Even though Epstein departed abruptly, he became close to Kane and Greensburg and was a client of Bear Stearns until its collapse in 2008. In August of 1981, Epstein founded his own consulting firm, Intercontinental Assets Group, which assigned clients in recovering stolen money from fraudulent brokers and lawyers. Epstein described his work at this time as being a high-level bounty hunter. He told friends that he worked sometimes as a consultant for governments and the very wealthy to recover embezzled funds, while at other times he worked for clients who had embezzled funds. Spanish actress and heiress Ana Obregón was one such wealthy client who Epstein helped in 1982 to recover her father's millions in lost investments, which had disappeared when Drysdale government securities collapsed because of fraud. Epstein also stated to some people at the time that he was an intelligence agent. During the 1980s, Epstein possessed an Australian passport that had his photo with a false name. The passport showed his place of residence in Saudi Arabia, which was kind of mysterious, but it wasn't that mysterious to those who knew Epstein. According to a Daily Beast article written on July 18, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers said that the fake foreign passport found in a safe was given to him by a friend and had already been used when he got it. The claim in a letter to the judge, who will decide whether the passport was issued or not, Epstein was given the passport at issue by a friend, according to defense lawyer Mark Fenrich. Some Jewish Americans were informally advised at the time to carry identification bearing a non-Jewish name when traveling internationally in case of hijacking. Epstein never used the document to travel internationally and never presented it to any immigration or customs authority. The passport stamps predating his receipt of the document do not reflect Mr. Epstein's entries or exits. During this period, one of Epstein's clients was the Saudi Arabian businessman Adnan Khashoggi, who was the middleman in transferring American weapons from Israel to Iran as part of the Iran-Contra affair in the 1980s. He was a high-level gun runner. Khashoggi was one of several defense contractors that he knew. In the mid-1980s, Epstein traveled multiple times between the United States, Europe, and Southwest Asia. While in London, Epstein met Stephen Hoffenberg. Hoffenberg is the former founder of the chief executive officer and president and chairman of Towers Financial Corporation, a debt collection agency, which was later discovered to be a Ponzi scheme. They had been introduced through Douglas Lessig, a defense contractor, and John Mitchell, the former U.S. Attorney General. Hoffenberg hired Epstein in 1987 as a consultant for Towers Financial Corporation. The agency brought debts people owed to hospitals, banks, and phone companies. Hoffenberg set Epstein up in offices in the Villard houses in Manhattan and paid him $25,000 per month for his consulting work. Hoffenberg and Epstein then refashioned themselves as corporate raiders using Towers Financial as their raiding vessel. One of Epstein's first assignments for Hoffenberg was to implement what turned out to be an unsuccessful bid to take over Pan American World Airways in 1987. A similar unsuccessful bid in 1988 was made to take over Emory Airport Corporation. During this period, Hoffenberg and Epstein worked closely together and traveled everywhere on Hoffenberg's private jet. According to an article written on Vanity Fair in March of 2003, Epstein who enjoyed Hoffenberg's acquaintance, would always fly by jet on Hoffenberg's jet. On Manhattan's Upper East Side, home to some of the expensive real estate on earth, exists the crown jewel of the city's residential townhouses. With its 15-foot high door oak, huge arched windows, and 9 floors, it sits on, or rather commands, the block of 71st Street between 5th and Madison. Almost ludicrously out of proportion with its 4- and 5-story neighbors, it seemed like an institution than a house. This is perhaps not surprising. Until 1989, it was the Birch Wathen Private School. Now it is said to be Manhattan's largest private residence. Guests are invited to lunch or dinner at the townhouse, and Epstein usually refers to the former as tea, since he likes to eat bite-sized morsels and drink copious quantities of Earl Grey. Tea is served in the leather room, so-called because of the cordovan-colored fabric on the walls. The chairs are covered in leopard print, and on the wall hangs a huge oriental fantasy of a woman holding an opium pipe and caressing a snarling lion skin. In addition to the townhouse, Epstein lives in what is reported to be the largest private dwelling in New Mexico, on an 18,007,500 acre ranch, which he named Zorro. It makes the townhouse look like a shack. It was here that he invited Hoffenberg many times. Hoffenberg and Epstein then refashioned themselves as corporate raiders, and in 1993, Towers Financial Corporation imploded when it was revealed as being one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in American history, losing its investors over $450 million. In court documents, Hoffenberg claimed that Epstein was intimately involved in the scheme. Epstein left the company by 1989 and was never charged for being involved with the massive investor fraud committed. It is unknown if Epstein acquired any stolen funds from the Towers Ponzi scheme. As for Stephen Hoffenberg, he would suffer a fate worse than Epstein. In February '84, after being arrested, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, in which he spent 18 years at several prisons, including FCI Fort Dix and Fort Dix in New Jersey. He settled a civil suit with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission for $60 million. Hoffenberg is currently paying back all of the above investors' debt. Epstein had managed to walk away unscathed. By 1995, Epstein was a director of the Wexner Foundation and Wexner Heritage Foundation. He was also the president of Wexner's Property, which developed part of the town of New Albany outside Columbus, Ohio, where Wexner had lived. The only publicly known billionaire client of Epstein was Leslie Wexner, the chairman and CEO of L Brands, formerly the Limited Incorporated and Victoria's Secret. In 1986, Epstein met Wexner through their mutual acquaintances, insurance executive Robert Meester and his wife in Palm Beach, Florida. A year later, Epstein became Wexner's financial advisor and served as his right-hand man. Within the year, Epstein had sorted out Wexner's entangled finances. By July of 1991, Wexner granted Epstein full power of attorney over his affairs. The power of attorney allowed Epstein to hire people, sign checks, buy and sell properties, borrow money, and do anything else of a legally binding nature on Wexner's behalf. Epstein made millions in fees by managing Wexner's financial affairs. Although never employed by L Brands, he corresponded frequently with the company executives. Epstein had often attended Victoria's Secret fashion shows and hosted the models at his New York City home, as well as helping aspiring models get work with the company. In 1996, Epstein changed the name of his firm to the Financial Trust Company, and for tax advantages, based it on the island of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. By relocating to the U.S. Virgin Islands, Epstein was able to reduce federal income taxes by 90%. The U.S. Virgin Islands acted as an offshore tax haven, while at the same time offering the advantages of being part of the United States banking system. In 2003, Epstein's bid to acquire New York Magazine, other bidders including advertising executives Donnie Deutsch, investor Nelson Peltz, and New York Daily News publisher Mortimer Zuckerman, and including the now disgraced film producer Harvey Weinstein. The ultimate buyer was Bruce Wasserstein, a longtime Wall Street investment banker who paid $55 million for the magazine. In 2004, Epstein and Zuckerman committed up to $25 million to finance Radar, a celebrity and pop culture magazine founded by Mayer Roshan. Mayer Roshan was an American writer, editor, and entrepreneur who had launched and edited a series of prominent magazines and websites. Epstein and Zuckerman were equal partners in the venture. Roshan, as its editor-in-chief, retained a small ownership stake. It folded after 3 issues. Epstein was also the president of the company Liquid Funding between 2000 and 2007. The company was an early pioneer in expanding the kind of debt that could be accepted or repurchased on the repo market, which involved a lender giving money to a borrower in exchange for securities that the borrower then agrees to buy back in an agreed upon later time and price. The innovator of liquid funding and other early companies was that instead of having stocks and bonds as the underlying securities, it had commercial mortgages and investment-grade residential mortgages bundled into complex securities as the underlying security. Liquid Funding was initially 40% owned by Bear Stearns. Through the help of the credit card rating agencies, Standards & Poor's, Fitch Ratings, and Moody's Investor Services, the new bundled securities were able to be created for companies so that they got a gold-plated AAA rating. The implosion of such complex securities because of their inaccurate ratings led to the collapse of Bear Stearns in March of 2008 and set in motion the financial crisis of 2007 and the subsequent Great Recession. If Liquid Funding was left holding large amounts of securities as collateral, it could have lost large amounts of money. In August of 2006, Epstein, a month after the federal investigation of him began, invested $57 million in the Bear Stearns high-grade structured credit strategies enhanced leverage hedge fund. This fund was highly leveraged in mortgage-backed collateralized debt obligations, CDOs. On April 18, 2007, an investor in the fund who had $57 million invested discussed redeeming his investment. At this time, the fund had a leverage ratio of 17-1, which meant for every dollar invested, there was $17 of borrowed funds. Therefore, the redemption of this investment would have been equivalent to removing $1 billion from the thinly traded CDO market. The selling of CDO assets to meet the redemptions that month began a repricing process and general freeze in the CDO market. But Epstein had other shady practices going on. Throughout his properties in New York, Florida, and of course in the St. James Virgin Islands, Epstein had installed concealed cameras in numerous places on his properties to allegedly record sexual activity with underage girls by prominent people for criminal purposes such as blackmail. According to an article written by the Evening Standard on January 22nd, 2001, quote, Prince Andrew had upset the Queen and ex-wife Fergie with his lad about the globe activities, but he's enjoying his social life. and new best friend, Ghislaine Maxwell. It has become almost a weekly occurrence that Prince Andrew is shown by a tabloid newspaper inviting a West Coast actress into his bedroom to tuck him in at 2 a.m., lounging on a yacht surrounded by topless women who are slipping out of nightclubs with various companions. Previously mostly known for his modest naval career and love of golf, in the past 18 months, the prince has embarked on a new lifestyle redolent of a middle-aged swinger rediscovering his youth in the playgrounds of the Eurotrash. His erratic behavior has greatly upset Buckingham Palace and his ex-wife, Fergie. No saint herself in the past, Fergie has been complaining he is so busy clubbing, he doesn't even have time to babysit Princess Beatrice and Eugene. It is said that they shared their concern when the Queen visited Fergie at Wood Farm, Sandringham, over Christmas. The truth of the matter is that he is spending more time with Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of crooked financier Robert Maxwell, who disappeared from his yacht before his creditors caught up with him in 1991, than his own daughters. In the past year, Andrew has been on 8 different breaks with Ghislaine in Britain, America, and Thailand. These include a February 2000 holiday at Mar-a-Lago Club in Palm Beach with Ghislaine, followed by a trip to New York to attend a fashion show with her. In March of 2000, a fundraising dinner for London Symphony Orchestra in New York, attended by Ghislaine. In April of that year, a holiday to New York where he socialized with Ghislaine. In May, an official trip to New York, and then holiday in Florida with Ghislaine. In June of 2000, a weekend at Windsor Castle for the Queen's party, which attended Ghislaine Maxwell. In October of 2000, an official visit to New York and evening partying with Ghislaine Maxwell. In December of 2000, a weekend house party at Sandringham Grange in honor of Ghislaine Maxwell's 39th birthday. And in January of 2001, a beach holiday in Thailand with Ghislaine Maxwell. In addition, Ghislaine Maxwell traveled to Britain in September to attend the wedding of Andrew's old fame, Aurelia Cecil. They went together. So what is Andrew's fascination with the disgraced typhoon's daughter, who now lives in exile in New York? Clearly, he revels in the jet-set lifestyle she had opened up to him and is determined to break free of the constraints his royal duties had imposed. Ghislaine had introduced him to her one-time partner, Jeffrey Epstein, an immensely powerful New York property developer and financier. Epstein had joined Andrew and Ghislaine on 5 of their breaks together in the past 12 months of the year 2000 to Mar-a-Lago, Phuket, Sandringham, Florida, and Windsor, and also has welcomed Andrew to stay at the $30 million home in which he owned a townhouse twice, at least last year. His influence over Prince Andrew is also causing concern among Andrew's friends and the royal family. Ghislaine is now employed by Epstein as a consultant at the elegant Madison Avenue offices. She stays at his house several nights a week and organizes his parties in New York. She also acts as his interior designer and has sold property on his behalf. Epstein's intensely secretive business's life constraints and contrasts with his enthusiastic social life. He is rarely seen without a beautiful companion on his arm, or Ghislaine not too far away. One friend would say he enjoys the company of pretty women. Ghislaine is important to him in other ways. She arranges his social life, including his secret life. Ghislaine is also now organizing Andrew's social life in the much way that Epstein had, introducing him to attractive women and encouraging his relationship with, among others, lingerie model Heidi Klum and PR girl Emma Gibbs. Instead, Ghislaine, Epstein, and Prince Andrew now appear to have evolved a curious symbiotic relationship. Wherever Ghislaine is seen with Andrew, Epstein is never far behind. End quote. Maria Farmer an artist who worked for Epstein in 1996, noted that Epstein showed her a media room in the New York mansion where there were individuals monitoring the pinhole cameras throughout the house. The media room was accessed through a hidden door. She stated that in the media room, there were men sitting there, and I looked on the cameras, and I saw toilet, toilet, bed, bed, toilet, bed. She added that it was very obvious that they were like monitoring private moments. Epstein allegedly lent girls to powerful people to integrate himself with them and also to gain possible blackmail information. According to the Department of Justice, he kept compact discs locked in a safe in his New York mansion with handwritten labels that included the description young redaction plus redaction. Epstein implied that he had blackmailed material when he told a New York Times reporter in 2018 off the record that he had dirt on powerful people, including information about their sexual proclivities and recreational drug use.
Cameras throughout the house.
The main thing he did when I walked in, I thought was interesting, he showed me where the men monitoring everything were. So when if you're facing the house, there's a window on the right that's barred. That's the room, the media room is what he called it. Yeah. And so there was a door that looked like an invisible door with all this limestone and everything, and you push it and you go in. And I saw all the cameras. What it was like old televisions, basically. It's like stacked, you know, but they were monitors inside this cabinet. And there were men sitting here, and I looked on the cameras and I saw toilet, toilet, bed, bed, toilet, bed. I'm like, I am never going to use the restroom here, and I'm never going to sleep here. You know, I mean, it was very obvious that they were like monitoring private moments.
March 15, 2005, a woman contacted Florida's Palm Beach Police Department and alleged that a 14-year-old stepdaughter had been taken to Epstein's mansion by an older girl. While there, she was allegedly paid $300 to strip and massage Epstein. She had allegedly undressed, but she left the encounter wearing her underwear. Palm Beach police began a 13-month undercover investigation of Jeffrey Epstein, including a search of his home. During the investigation, Palm Beach police officer Michael Ryder publicly accused the Palm Beach County State Prosecutor Barry Kirshner of being too lenient and called for help from the FBI. According to an article in the New Yorker written by Philip Weiss on December 7, 2007, quote, Epstein was under indictment for sex crimes in Palm Beach, Florida, and I expected that when he came into the office of PR guru Howard Rubenstein, he would be sober and reserved. Quite the opposite. He was sparkling and ingenuous, apologizing for the half-hour lateness with a charming line. I never realized how many one-way streets with no right turns there are in Midtown. I finally got out and walked. And as we went down the corridor to Rubenstein's office, he asked, have you managed to talk to many of my friends? Epstein had been supplying me the phone numbers of important scientists and financiers and media figures. One of his accusers, a girl of 14, had put his age at 45, not in his 50s, and you could see why. His walk was youthful, and his face was ruddy with health. I told Epstein and Rubenstein the story the New Yorker wanted to do, and Epstein seemed to find ironic delight in every word. A secretive genius, I said, not secretive private. He corrected in his warm Brooklyn accent. And if I was a genius, I wouldn't be sitting here. A guy with sex issues? A smile formed on Epstein's low brown lips. What do you mean by sex issues? Well, he was 54, had never been married. I didn't finish. Are you channeling my mother? End quote. The FBI then became involved. Subsequently, the police alleged that Epstein had paid several girls to perform sexual acts on him. Interviews with 5 alleged victims and 17 witnesses under oath, a high school transcript, and other items found in Epstein's trash and home allegedly showed that some of the girls involved were clearly under 18, the youngest being as young as 13, with many under 16. The police search of Epstein's home found 2 hidden cameras and large numbers of photos of girls throughout the house, some of whom the police had interviewed in the course of their investigation. Adriana Ross, a former model from Poland who became an Epstein assistant, reportedly removed computer drives and other electronic equipment from the financier's Florida mansion before Palm Beach police searched the home as part of their investigation. The court documents record that a search of Epstein residence by Palm Beach police detective Joseph Ricari in 2005 uncovered an incriminating Amazon receipt containing books on sex slavery. The books he ordered are titled SM 101, A Realistic Introduction. The other was Slavecraft, Round Maps for Erotic Servitude, Principles, Skills, and Tools. A former employee told the police that Epstein would receive massages 3 times a day. Eventually, the FBI compiled reports on 34 confined minors eligible for restitution, increased to 40, whose allegations of sexual abuse by Epstein included corroborating details. Julie Brown's 2018 expose in the Miami Herald identified about 80 victims and located about 60 of them. She quotes the then police chief writer as saying, "This was 50-something she's and 1 he, and the she's all basically told the same story." Details from the investigation included allegations that 12-year-old triplets were flown in from France for Epstein's birthday and flown back the following day after being sexually abused by the financier. It was alleged that young girls were recruited from Brazil and other South American countries, former Soviet countries, including Europe, and that Jean-Luc Brunel's MC2 modeling agency was also supplying girls for Epstein. In May of 2006, Palm Beach police filed a probable cause affidavit saying that Epstein should be charged with 4 counts of unlawful sex with minors and 1 count of sexual abuse.
Filed by Virginia Roberts against you. Isn't it true, sir, that a friend of yours sent you 3 12-year-old females for you to sexually abuse on one of your birthdays?
Form argumentative, harassing, and irrelevant to this lawsuit.
But you're saying it's part of the lawsuit?
Yeah, I'll read it directly.
It was Jeffrey's birthday one.
On one of defendant Epstein's birthdays, a friend of defendant Epstein sent him 3 12-year-old girls from France who spoke no English for defendant to sexually exploit and abuse. After doing so, they were sent back to France the next day. Isn't that true?
Once again, I'm going to move to strike. Irrelevant, argumentative, harassing.
I would like to answer that question. I really would. However, today, my attorneys have told me I have to assert my 5th Amendment, 6th Amendment, and 14th Amendment rights of the U.S. Constitution.
You're invoking your 5th Amendment rights to each of these questions because you know that your answers will incriminate you and you feel that it will result in you being prosecuted for these crimes. Isn't that right?
Objection, argumentative, harassing, and calls for a legal conclusion.
No, in fact, the Supreme Court recently said that the 5th Amendment right is there to protect the innocent. So that's the way I'd like to answer that.
According to the probable cause affidavit dated March 15, 2005, quote, from March 15, 2005 through February 2006, the Palm Beach Police Department conducted a sexual battery investigation involving Jeffrey Epstein, Sarah Kellen, and Haley Robson. Sworn taped statements were taken from 5 victims and 17 witnesses concerning massages and unlawful sexual activity that took place at the residence of Jeffrey Epstein, 358 El Brillo Way, Palm Beach. Several of the victims were recruited by and brought to the residence by Haley Robson to perform massages for Epstein, for which Robson received monetary compensation. During the visit, they would be introduced to Sarah Kellen, Epstein's assistant, who was in turn would record their telephone numbers and name. The victims would be brought to Epstein's bedroom to provide the massage. Epstein would enter the room and order the victims to remove their clothing to provide the massage. As the victims complied and provided the massages, Epstein would rub his fingers on their vaginas. On occasion, Epstein would introduce a massager, vibrator, and rub the victims' vaginas as they provided the massage. On three separate occasions, Epstein had intercourse and inserted his penis fingers in the victims' vaginas. At the conclusion of the massages, the victims were paid sums of money ranging from $200 to $1,000. The facts, as reported, are as follows. On March 15, 2005, a 14-year-old white female, hereafter referred to as blank, and her family reported unlawful sexual activity which occurred at a residence within the town of Palm Beach, reported that a subject known to her as Jeff had touched her vaginal area with a vibrator while within his residence. Jeff was later identified as Jeffrey Epstein through a photo lineup. During a sworn taped interview, stated that Haley Robeson, a cousin, blank, boyfriend, and classmate at blank, worked for a wealthy man and did sexual favors for him. She also admitted that Robeson had offered her an opportunity to take money. During the beginning of the month of February 2005, blank explained that she was first approached by Robeson to go with her to Epstein's house. Blank stated that Robeson, along with a Hispanic female, later identified as blank, picked her up at her father's house on a Sunday. Blank was not sure of the exact dates, but knew it was a Sunday. Blank told her that after they were going shopping, but in reality, Robeson drove them to Palm Beach. During the drive, a blank. The end of the affidavit. On July 27, 2006, Epstein was arrested by the Palm Beach Police Department on state felony charges of procuring a minor for prostitution and solicitation of a prostitute. He was booked at the Palm Beach County Jail and later released on $3,000 bond. State Prosecutor Kircher later convened a Palm Beach County grand jury, which was usually only done in capital cases. Presented evidence from only 2 victims. The grand jury returned a single charge of felony solicitation of prostitution, to which Epstein pleaded not guilty in August of 2006. Epstein's defense lawyers included Roy Black, Gerald Lefcourt, Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, and former U.S. Solicitor General Ken Starr. In July 2006, the FBI began its own investigation of Epstein, nicknamed Operation Leap Year. It resulted in a 53-page indictment in June of 2007. Alexander Acosta, then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, agreed to a plea deal, which Alan Dershowitz helped to negotiate to grant immunity from all federal criminal charges to Epstein, along with 4 named co-conspirators and any unnamed potential co-conspirators. According to the Miami Herald, the non-prosecution agreement essentially shut down an ongoing FBI probe into whether there were more victims and other powerful people who took part in Epstein's sex crimes. At the time, this halted the investigation and sealed the indictment. The Miami Herald said Acosta agreed, despite a federal law to the contrary, that the deal would be kept from the victims. According to a Miami Herald article, it was stated that Acosta seemed to have known some very powerful people and was associated with some of them. Acosta later said he offered a lenient plea deal because he was told that Epstein belonged to intelligence and was above his pay grade and to leave it alone. Epstein agreed to plead guilty in Florida State Court to 2 felonious prostitution charges, serve 18 months in prison, register as a sex offender, and pay restitution to 36 victims identified by the FBI. The plea deal was later described as a sweetheart deal. According to John Schneider, in an article written on The Observer, he said, blunt quote, "In terms of scandals, the sordid saga of Jeffrey Epstein has it all. Mysterious gaudy fortunes, jet-setting debauchery, lots of pretty girls, including very pretty girls, sex and more sex, and of course, the intelligence apparatuses." But what was his life, really? That's a key question which nobody is enabled to publicly answer. How Epstein maintained his fantastically extravagant lifestyle has long been a topic of speculation and mystery. He claimed to have made his vast fortune as a financial guru to the super rich, but nearly all of his clients were unnamed. Moreover, in a business where overwork is standard, Epstein seemed to have unlimited free time to pursue his avocation of obtaining massages from young women. A major hint was dropped this week by Vicky Ward, the intrepid investigative journalist who has tried to expose the ugly reality behind the Epstein facade longer than anyone. In a report for the Daily Beast, Ward shed light on the Justice Department's 2007 non-prosecution agreement with Epstein, that sweetest of sweet deals, since it got Epstein a laughably lenient sentence for crimes which any normal person would have gone away for decades after admitting to. The claim that Acosta said he was behind an intelligence wall. This claim was met with an appropriate degree of skepticism. On camera, Acosta maintained that he did the best he could with the case while admitting that it was hardly look like a fair punishment now. The intelligence issue came up, and Acosta's response was bizarre. He punted on setting the record straight, instead proffering a strange word salad when asked about Ward's reporting. To anyone acquainted with one nation's capital, that's a non-denial of epic kind, given the chance to refute Ward's report specifically that the Epstein case involved intelligence matters. Who are the suspects then? It seemed awfully coincidental that Epstein's best pal and business partner for decades has been Ghislaine Maxwell, the British socialite and daughter of the late Robert Maxwell, the media mogul who died under mysterious circumstances in 1991. Something of a Bond villain turned real life. Maxwell loved the limelight, despite being a swindler and a spy. British counterintelligence assessed that Maxwell was working for the KGB, while pervasive allegations that he was working for Mossad are equally plausible. Since the lines between Russian and Israeli intelligence and organized crime can get remarkably blurry in practice, it is explained that assessing whom Epstein's been working for may, as long as he had, proved difficult to answer with any precision. But we have a suspect list to start asking questions. End quote. On June 30th, 2008, after Epstein pleaded guilty to a state charge of procuring for prostitution a girl below 18, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. While most convicted sex offenders in Florida are sent to state prison, Epstein was instead housed in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Stockade, and according to the sheriff's office, was after 3.5 months allowed to leave the jail on work release for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. This contravened the sheriff's own policies, requiring a maximum remaining sentence of 10 months and making sex offenders ineligible for the privilege. He was allowed to come and go outside for specified release hours. Epstein's cell door was also left unlocked, and he had access to the attorney room where a television was installed just for him before he was moved to the Stockade's previously unstaffed infirmary. He worked at the office of a foundation he had created shortly before reporting to jail. He dissolved it after he had served his time. The sheriff's office received $128,000 from Epstein's nonprofit to pay for the costs of extra services being provided during his work release. His office was monitored by permit deputies whose overtime was paid by Epstein himself. They were required to wear suits and checked in welcome guests as the front desks. Later, the sheriff's office said that these guest logs were destroyed per the department's records of retention rules. He was allowed to use his own driver to drive him between jail and his office and other appointments. Epstein served almost 13 months before being released on July 22, 2009, for a year of probation on house arrest until August of 2010. While on probation, he was allowed numerous trips on his corporate jets to his residence in Manhattan and the U.S. Virgin Islands. He was also allowed long shopping trips and allowed to walk around Palm Beach for exercise. After a contested hearing in January 2011 and an appeal, he stayed registered in New York State as a level 3 high risk of repeat sex offender, a lifelong designation. At that hearing, the Manhattan District Attorney argued unsuccessfully that the level should be reduced to a low risk level 1 and was chided by the judge. Despite opposition from Epstein's lawyers that he had a main home in U.S. Virgin Islands, the judge confirmed he personally must check in with the New York Police Department every 90 days. Though Epstein had been a level 3 registered sex offender in New York since 2010, the New York Police Department never enforced the 90-day regulation, so noncompliance is a felony.
The last time we saw Jeffrey Epstein in West Palm Beach was September 6th of last year. He was getting off his private jet at PBIA to huddle with lawyers, fighting charges he used his mansion in Palm Beach for sexual escapades with girls under 18. Reliable sources tell us he'll report for a 1.5-year term in prison in Florida in June, then face a year probation. The fact that Epstein was allowed to travel to Israel reflects his vast business interests around the world, according to someone close to the case. But allowing someone soon to be imprisoned on felony charges to leave the country is highly irregular. That, according to investigative journalist John Connolly, who has covered the Epstein scandal from day one.
In most instances where people are facing criminal time and because a plea agreement has been made or they're under arrest for serious charges, they are forced to surrender their passport. And apparently Mr. Epstein has not been forced to do that.
The fact that the court ordered Epstein not to have contact with underage girls may indicate that Epstein will be labeled a sex offender. That is something his vast stable of high-powered attorneys have been fighting. Sources tell us that Epstein will likely report to a state prison with modern internet facilities so that he can do business from behind bars. It's been more than 3 years now since Palm Beach police started investigating Jeffrey Epstein. Reporter Connolly says money has bought him time.
I've always been a bit shocked by the way this the state prosecutor has handled this case from the get-go. Historically, the police have asked for arrest warrants and been given them. In this case, because of apparently some very high-powered attorneys, they've treated Mr. Epstein much differently.
The immunity agreement and his lenient treatment were the subject of ongoing public dispute, in which the Palm Beach police chief accused the state of giving him preferential treatment, and the Miami Herald said that U.S. Attorney Acosta gave Epstein the deal of a lifetime under mysterious circumstances. However, suspicions arose, and following Epstein's arrest in July of 2019 on sex trafficking charges, Acosta had resigned as Secretary of Labor effective the very next day. After the accusations became public, several persons and institutions returned donations that they had received from Epstein, including Elliot Spitzer and Bill Richardson and the Palm Beach Police Department. Harvard University announced it would not return any money, which is not that shocking when you consider the source. Various charitable donations that Epstein had made to finance children's education were also questioned. A number of civil cases would open up, including Jane Doe versus Epstein of 2008, Jane Doe versus the United States in 2014, Virginia Guffey versus Epstein in 2015, Virginia Guffey versus Ghislaine Maxwell in 2015, Jane Doe versus Epstein and Trump in 2016, Sarah Ransomore versus Epstein and Maxwell in 2017, Bradley Edwards defamation versus Epstein in 2018, Maria Farmer versus Epstein and Maxwell in 2019, Jennifer Aroz versus Epstein and Maxwell in 2019, Caitlin Doe versus Epstein's estate in 2019, Jane Doe versus Epstein's estate in 2019, Teresa Helm versus Epstein's estate in 2019, Jane Doe 15 versus Epstein's estate in 2019, Tila Davies versus Epstein's estate in 2019, Jane Doe's 1 through 9 versus Epstein's estate in 2019, J.J. Doe versus Epstein's estate in 2019, U.S. Virgin Islands versus Epstein's estate in 2020, Jane Doe versus Maxwell and Epstein's estate 2020, Jane Doe versus Epstein's estate in 2020. On July 6, 2019, Epstein was arrested by the FBI and New York Police Department Crimes Against Children Task Force at Teterboro Airport, New Jersey, on sex trafficking charges. He was jailed at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City, which held prisoners such as John Gotti, El Chapo Guzman, and Paul Manafort. According to witnesses and sources, on the day of his arrest, about a dozen FBI agents forced open the door to his Manhattan townhouse, the Herbert Strauss House, with search warrants. The search of his townhouse turned up evidence of sex trafficking and also found hundreds and perhaps thousands of sexually suggestive photographs of fully or partially nude females. Some of the photos were confirmed as those of underage females. In a locked safe, compact discs were found with handwritten labels, including the descriptions young name plus name, miscellaneous nudes 1, and girl pics nude. Also found in the safe were $70,000 in cash and 48 diamonds, and a fraudulent Austrian passport which expired in 1987 that had Epstein's photo but another name. The passport had numerous entrance and exit stamps, including entrance stamps that showed the use of a passport to enter France, Spain, the United Kingdom, and Saudi Arabia in the mid-1980s. The passport showed his palace and place of residence as Saudi Arabia. According to his attorneys, Epstein had been advised to acquire the passport because, as an affluent member of the Jewish faith, he was in danger of being kidnapped while traveling abroad. On July 8th, prosecutors with the Public Corruption Unit of the Southern District of New York charged him with sex trafficking and conspiracy to traffic minors for sex. The grand jury indictment alleged that dozens of underage girls were brought into Epstein's mansions for sexual encounters. Judge Kenneth Mara was to decide whether the non-prosecution agreement that protected Epstein from the more serious charges should still stand. Epstein requested to be released on bond, offering to post $100 million with the condition that he would also submit to house arrest in his New York City mansion. U.S. District Judge Richard M. Berman denied the request on July 18th, saying that Epstein posed a danger to the public and was a serious flight risk to avoid prosecution. On July 23rd, Epstein was found injured and semi-unconscious at 1:30 a.m. on the floor of his cell, with marks around his neck that were suspected to be the result of either a suicide attempt or an assault. His cellmate, former New York City police officer Nicholas Taglione, was charged with 4 counts of murder, was questioned about Epstein's condition. He denied having any knowledge of what happened. Epstein himself said he recollected nothing. According to NBC News, 2 sources said that Epstein might have tried to hang himself. A third said the injuries were not serious and could have been staged. And a 4th source said that an assault by a cellmate had not been ruled out. On August 29, 2019, following Epstein's death just 10 days prior, the case against Epstein was closed after Judge Berman dismissed all sex trafficking charges. However, he also expressed support for Epstein's accusers. prosecutors vehemently objected to the ruling and stated that they would continue an investigation for potential co-conspirators. According to an AP News article written August 29, 2019, quote, U.S. District Judge Richard Berman took the procedural step of adding his initials to an order dismissing the indictment that charged the 66-year-old Epstein with conspiracy to commit sex trafficking of minors and sex trafficking of minors in the early 2000s in Florida and New York. In requesting the action 10 days earlier, U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman, who is not related to the judge, noted that the law required the dismissal after Epstein killed himself in jail while he was awaiting trial. The judge said he was incorporating by reference the hearing's transcript while he underscored the significance of the Crime Victims' Rights Act. As the unusual hearing, women detailed how Epstein abused them. The women said he used his financial power and connections to famous people to make them vulnerable, some as teenagers, to sexual attacks that sometimes continued for years. The allegation mirrored criminal charges in which prosecutors said Epstein repeatedly assaulted women and teenage girls in the early 2000s at his $77 million Manhattan mansion and at other opulent estates in Palm Beach, Florida. On August 23, 2019, the prosecutor's office in Paris, France, opened a preliminary investigation into Epstein. He is being investigated for rape and sexual assault of minors under the age of 15, criminal association with a view to committing crimes, and association with criminals with a view to committing offenses. The prosecutor said that the goal of the investigation is to find possible crimes committed in France and elsewhere against French citizens. However, as investigators continue to look deeper, the exact origin of Epstein's wealth is unknown. Leslie Wexner was one source of Epstein's original wealth. An assistant of Epstein also stated that he got his fortune started through Robert Maxwell, the media mogul and father of Ghislaine Maxwell. When Epstein pleaded guilty in 2008 to solicitation and procuring prostitution, his lawyer stated that he was a billionaire with a net worth of over $1 billion. A number of sources, however, have questioned the extent of Epstein's wealth and his status as a billionaire. According to an article in the New York Times, his fortune may have been illusion than fact. Epstein lost large sums of money in the 2008 financial crisis, and friends and patrons, including retail billionaire Leslie Wexner, deserted him following his pleading guilty to prostitution charges in 2008. There was also rumors that he was a sexual liaison to Leslie Wexner, a homosexual partnership. New York Magazine claimed that there was scant proof of Epstein's financial bona fides, and Forbes also ran an article entitled "Why Sex Offender Jeffrey Epstein is Not a Billionaire." His residences included the Herbert and Strauss House on 9 East 71st Street in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It was originally purchased for $13 million in 1989 by Epstein's mentor, Lex Wexner. The financier's other properties included a residence in Palm Beach, Florida, purchased in 1990, 7 units in an apartment building near the Arc de Triomphe at 22 Avenue Fourche in Paris, France, a 7,500-acre ranch named Zorro Ranch near Stanley, New Mexico, purchased in 1993, a private island near St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands called Little St. James, which included a mansion, guest houses, purchased in 1998, and the neighboring island of Great St. James, purchased in 2016. Epstein was building a compound on the latter, which included an amphitheater and underwater office and pool, but ran into problems when a stop work order was issued in 2018, when it continued despite the order. Epstein, previous to his final Manhattan home, lived in a spacious townhouse, which was a former Iranian government building that had been taken over by the State Department during the Iranian Revolution at 34 East 69th Street. He also previously owned a mansion outside Columbus, Ohio, near Wexner's home from 1992 to 1998. From his political donations was also come into question. From 1989 until 2003, Epstein donated more than $139,000 to the United States Democratic Party, federal candidates, and committees, and handed over $18,000 to U.S. Republican Party candidates and groups. Epstein contributed $50,000 to Democrat Bill Richardson's successful campaign for governor of New Mexico in 2002. He later contributed $35,000 to Gary King, a Democrat, and Attorney General of New Mexico. He also had an interest in eugenics and transhumanism. According to various sources, beginning in the early 2000s, Epstein developed a strong interest in improving the human race through genetic engineering and artificial intelligence, including using his own sperm. He addressed the scientific community at various events and occasions and communicated his fascination with eugenics. It was reported in August of 2019 that Epstein had planned to seed the human race with his DNA by impregnating up to 20 women at a time using his New Mexico compound as a baby ranch, where mothers would give birth to his offspring. He was an advocate of cryonics and his own idiosyncratic version of transhumanism, and had said that he intended to have his penis and head frozen. On July 23, 2019, 3 weeks prior to his death, Epstein was found unconscious. However, on August 10, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his cell at Metropolitan Correction Center in New York City at 6:30 a.m. The Bureau of Prisons said life-saving measures were initiated immediately upon the discovery of Epstein's body. Emergency responders were called, and he was taken to a hospital. And on August 10, 2019, the Bureau of Prisons and U.S. Attorney General William Barr called the death an apparent suicide, although no final determination had been made. The circumstances leading up to his death were being investigated by the United States Department of Justice.
That at 6:39 this morning, the fire department and EMS here in New York City got a phone call from MCC, which is a federal detention facility here in Manhattan in New York City, where Jeffrey Epstein was being held awaiting trial. They took him to New York's downtown hospital. He was in cardiac arrest. And he was pronounced there. What we know from officials that have been briefed on what happened, he was found and appeared that he had hung himself in his cell or wherever he was being held within MCC, and he was found by prison officials this morning, and that's when they reached out and they called EMS in unsuccessful attempts to revive him. So that happened early this morning, and right now what we're trying to do is figure out if he was still on suicide watch, because there was an incident that occurred several weeks ago where he injured himself. It wasn't quite clear if that was an attempt on his life, an attempt to perhaps stage an attack. The details of that were never really kind of hashed out, if you will. So this morning there's some significant questions on how somebody who it was such a high-profile defendant, somebody who had connections that went up to a current president, could be found dead, and how this could have happened.
On August 11, 2019, an autopsy was performed. It appeared likely that Epstein had thrown himself violently off the cell's top bunk, which would explain the damage he suffered other than strangulation. However, the preliminary result of the autopsy found that Epstein sustained multiple breaks in his neck bones. Among the bones broken in Epstein's neck was the hyoid bone. Such breaks of the hyoid bone can occur from those who hang themselves, but they are more common in victims of homicide rather than by strangulation. A 2010 study found broken hyoids in 25% of cases of hangings. A larger study conducted from 2010 to 2016 found hyoid damage in just 16 of 264 cases, or 6% of hangings. Forensic pathologist Cyril Weck noted that hanging by leaning forward would not result in broken cervical bones. On August 16, 2019, Barbara Sampson, the New York City medical examiner, ruled Epstein's death a suicide by hanging. However, Epstein's lawyers said that the evidence concerning Epstein's death was far more consistent with murder rather than suicide. Michael Baden, an independent pathologist hired by the Epstein estate, observed the autopsy. And in October of 2019, Dr. Baden said that Mr. Epstein experienced a number of injuries, among them a broken bone in his neck, that are extremely unusual in suicide hangings and could only occur much more commonly in homicidal strangulation. Baden stated that he thinks that the evidence points to homicide rather than suicide. Attorney General Barr ordered an investigation by the Department of Justice Inspector General in addition to the investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, saying that he was appalled by Epstein's death in federal custody. 2 days later, Barr said that there had been serious irregularities in the prison's handling of Epstein, promising, "We will get to the bottom of what happened, and there will be accountability." On August 14, 2019, Manhattan federal judge Richard Berman, who was overseeing Epstein's criminal case, wrote to the Metropolitan Correctional Center warden Lamine Denaye, inquiring as to whether an investigation into the millionaire's apparent suicide would include a probe into his prior July 23rd injuries. Judge Berman wrote that, to his knowledge, it had never been definitively explained as to what they concluded about the incident. President Susan Gregg of the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 3148, said that the MCC is functioning with fewer than 70% of the needed correctional officers, forcing many to work mandatory overtime and 60 to 70-hour weekends. In previous congressional testimony, Attorney General Barr admitted that the Bureau of Prisons was short about 4,000 employees. He had lifted the freeze and was working to recruit sufficient new officers to replace those who had departed. Epstein's attorneys asked Judge Berman to probe their client's death, alleging that they could provide evidence that the incident resulting in his death was far more consistent with assault rather than suicide. 1 week after having signed his will, it was reported that at least one camera in the hallway outside Epstein's cell had footage that was unusual, although other usable footage was recorded in the area. 2 cameras that malfunctioned in front of Epstein's cell were sent to the FBI crime lab for examination. Federal prosecutors subpoenaed up to 20 correctional officers concerning the cause of Epstein's death. On November 19, 2019, federal prosecutors in New York charged that Metropolitan Correctional Center guards Michael Thomas and Tova Noel with creating false records and with conspiracy, after video footage obtained by prosecutors revealed that Epstein had, against regulation, been in his cell unchecked for 8 hours prior to being found dead. And on May 22, 2021, the 2 guards admitted they falsified records but were spared from any time behind bars under a deal with federal prosecutors. An investigation was held concerning Epstein's death. But what were the answers?
Dr. Zwirn, can you think of any other incidents in the history of the BOP that have caused as much crisis for public trust for your institution as Epstein's death?
I can only speak for since 1976 when I joined the Bureau. I don't know prior to that, but I would say it's probably gotten the most public attention.
There are lots of taxpayers and citizens who've never thought about the BOP, and you have lots of good, patriotic, hardworking folks there. I get that. But in terms of a crisis of public trust in general, but also in terms of your workforce, this death happened in the middle of August, early August. it's Thanksgiving, and you're here to testify today, and you say you're not allowed to speak about this incident. I think that's crazy. Can you distinguish among types of investigations, at least for us? Because I'm aware of at least 3 Epstein investigations. You got a whole bunch of women who were raped by this guy. This is a sex trafficking ring in the United States. This guy had evidence. He's got co-conspirators, and there are victims out there who want to know where the evidence has gone. Can you tell us a little bit more about the different investigations? I understand there's at least one that you're directed by Main Justice not to speak about, but there are at least 3 investigations. Can you unpack them, please?
There are 2 investigations that are ongoing. One is the FBI's investigation, and the other is the Inspector General's investigation.
Both inside BOP, but there's a third one outside, which is why Epstein was in your institution to begin with.
Yeah, and that, sir, is completely out of my
I get that. There's a lot here where DOJ has failed. There's a lot here that BOP has failed. Let's just be clear so we have a level set for everybody in this room. You're in your job because of this crisis, right? You come here today and you say you can't testify about it, but the reason you're director now is because the last guy got fired, right?
Senator, I can't tell you what I don't know. I have received no information from the FBI investigation yet, nor no information from the Inspector General. Once those entities go into one of our facilities, we are forbidden from talking to anybody in the institution. We can send in a team and look at wherever there might have been a security flaw or something, but we are not allowed to talk to anybody in our institutions about anything that happened over the Epstein.
With all due respect, you still have an obligation to speak to the girls who were raped by this guy today. You may not have to speak about every particular of the guards that were arrested last night, but the fact that there is an ongoing attempt by the United States government to find out if there's still any evidence about the co-conspirators, you do have an obligation to speak to those girls who were raped today. You may not speak about the specifics of the charges against those 2 guards this morning who were taken into custody, but more broadly, you should be able to unpack, have we changed any processes about how cases like this are handled? It's been more than 90 days, and you said, I think your quote was, we treat every inmate the same. We believe in America that every individual has equal dignity, but not every inmate has equal value for future criminal investigations. Jeffrey Epstein was still to testify in a case. Somebody who's already been convicted, who may be on suicide watch, there are lots of good reasons to not want that guy to be able to kill himself. This is different, because it isn't just about the individual inmate who might kill themselves. It's about the fact that that bastard wasn't able to testify against his other co-conspirators. So it is wrong as a management matter for you to say we treat everybody the same. We should be treating people who are yet to testify against other felons, against other rapists. They have a lot more priority for your institution, don't they?
Senator, pretty much all of our inmates that are in any of our jail facilities are pretrial. They're still yet to testify, to be involved, to share information on other cases. I don't know what evidence you're asking of me. If you're saying, was there any evidence in his room, in his possession at the time?
No,
that was all confiscated by the FBI.
In his brain and in the cameras and in the tapes that the American public well understands appear to not be urgent enough for the Department of Justice.
No, it's very urgent for the Department of Justice, and it's all been confiscated by the FBI, and it's all part of their investigation. That's why none of that is shared with the Director of the Bureau of Prisons or anyone in the Bureau until the investigations are completed. Once those are completed, I'd be very happy to come up here and talk with any one of you that want to hear everything about we glean from those investigations. But until I have that information, there's nothing I can tell you. If I don't have the information, I cannot share anything with you.
Then how widespread is the problem of sleeping on the job? There are lots of people in the public who think this seems a very convenient excuse. And so tell us, is it a systemic problem? Do we have a lot of people who sleep on the job when they're supposed to be guarding federal inmates?
We have a few, sir, and we have been monitoring the cameras that are existing in every one of our institutions to determine how well and how effectively our inmates are, our staff members are doing their rounds and counts in the institutions. We have found a couple of other instances, and we have immediately referred those to the Inspector General's office, and I'm encouraging that if people just chose not to do their job, we're hoping the U.S. Attorney's Office will pick up those cases and prosecute them for us, because we don't want those people in the Bureau of Prisons. They are dangerous to everybody, the inmates and the staff. And so we are zealously going about trying to determine which of our employees are good employees and who do their job, and that is the vast majority of the prison staff. But we do have some, I know, out there who obviously choose not to follow policy, choose not to do their job, and we want them gone. I do not want them in our institutions, and I am exploring those very, very carefully to identify them and get them out of our system. Now, if it's a training problem and they didn't know what they were supposed to do, that's our problem. That's management's problem. We have to do a better job training our staff. But if someone is well-trained, well-experienced, and chooses not to do their job, we want them gone. I assure you of that.
I'm at time, so I'll just give you a preview of something I'm going to ask you for the record after the event. You made a really important statement about drone drops of different kinds of contraband into your institutions. That's obviously a new and hard problem. That's a problem against which we have to play defense, but there's also new opportunities for offense. And so what your long-term strategy is inside the institution about cameras is something that I think a lot of us would like to hear more, and I'll send you a letter with some questions. Because Epstein's hallway should have still been monitored by cameras, even if his guards were asleep. And we don't have information about whether or not there were adequate cameras there. And so I think a lot of us would like to understand where technology dollars are going.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
But what happened to Ghislaine Maxwell? On December 27, 2019, Reuters reported that Maxwell was among those under the FBI investigation for facilitating Epstein. After his arrest, Maxwell was in hiding, communicating with the courts only through her lawyers, who, as of January 30, 2020, had refused to accept on her behalf service of 3 lawsuits against her. The New York Times reported that by 2016, Maxwell was no longer being photographed at events. By 2017, her lawyers claimed that a judge that they do not know her address. They further stated that she was in London, but they did not believe she had a permanent residence. Maxwell had a history of being unreachable during legal proceedings. Many people were suspecting that it was the intelligence services that were protecting her, although there was no evidence to suggest this. According to court documents from a lawsuit filed by Epstein against Bradley Edwards, a representative for several of his accusers, in 2010, Maxwell had agreed to provide a deposition in the case, but reportedly left the country one day before Edwards was scheduled to fly to New York to take her deposition, claiming she needed to return to the United Kingdom to be with a deathly ill mother, with no intention of returning to the United States. However, Maxwell returned with a month to attend Chelsea Clinton's wedding. In January 2020, it was reported that Maxwell had refused to allow her lawyers to be served with several lawsuits in which she had been directly named in 2019 and 2020, including one by Farmer and from Azrad Rosas. While Maxwell's lawyers continued to argue on her behalf against the release of additional court documents from the Geoffrey versus Maxwell lawsuit, they claimed to not know where she is or to have any permission to accept the recent lawsuits filed against her. Authorities in the United States Virgin Islands were unsuccessful in locating Maxwell during the 3.5 months they were seeking to service her with a subpoena. Prosecutors consider Maxwell to be a critical fact witness in their lawsuit against Epstein's estate. A court filing from the U.S. v. Department of Justice released on July 10, 2020, stated that Maxwell was also under investigation for her alleged participation in Epstein's sex trafficking operation in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Maxwell faced persistent allegations of procuring and sexually trafficking underage girls for Epstein and others, charges she had vehemently denied. However, Maxwell was arrested in Bradford, New Hampshire by the FBI on July 2nd, 2020, through the use of an IMSI catcher Stingray mobile phone tracking device on a phone used by her to call one of her lawyers, her husband, Scott Borgenson, and her sister, Isabel.
It's been almost a year since Jeffrey Epstein apparently killed himself in a US jail, and now the FBI has arrested one of his close associates, Ghislaine Maxwell, on 6 charges relating to the disgraced financier's sex crimes.
Maxwell was among Epstein's closest associates and helped him exploit girls who were as young as 14 years old. Maxwell played a critical role in helping Epstein to identify, befriend, and groom minor victims for abuse. In some cases, Maxwell participated in the abuse herself.
The charges relate to the grooming of underage girls between 1994 and 1997. At the time of his death, Epstein was awaiting trial on federal charges of trafficking minors, after New York prosecutors argued they weren't bound by a previous plea bargain that saw him get off with just a year's prison time in 2008. Dozens of women alleging abuse at his hands came forward in the wake of his death to sue his estate. At the time, Maxwell ducked out of the public eye and kept a low profile. The British socialite went as far as to buy the huge New Hampshire property where she was arrested in cash through a limited liability company to hide her identity.
We have been discreetly keeping tabs on Maxwell's whereabouts as we work this investigation, and more recently we learned she had slithered away to a gorgeous property in New Hampshire, continuing to live a life of privilege while her victims live with the trauma inflicted upon them years ago. We moved when we were ready, and Ms. Maxwell was arrested without incident.
Prosecutors have said Maxwell should be detained given few ties to the United States and that she poses an extreme flight risk. The charges against her could see her in prison for life.
The problems were just beginning for Ghislaine Maxwell, who said during a July 2016 deposition for a defamation lawsuit that she learned about abuse claims against Jeffrey Epstein like everybody else, like most of the world, when it was announced in the papers. When asked if she tried to learn whether the assertions were accurate, Maxwell was stopped by her attorney from answering in a transcript released late Wednesday in 2016, along with other documents pursued by the Miami Herald. Still, she indicated that she left employment with Epstein because she ceased to be happy in the job, and I ceased to be happy spending time with Mr. Epstein. She also said that he became more difficult to work with. Asked to be more specific in the deposition, she said, just general, just doesn't work, according to the transcript. The quote was in a public portion of a transcript of a deposition that resulted from a single settled lawsuit brought against one of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Giuffre. Dozens of pages were blacked out entirely, and over 100 pages of the 193-page document had redactions. The redactions came after U.S. District Judge Liana Preska ruled that any testimony addressing Maxwell's sexual relations with adults could remain sealed. Lawyers for Maxwell had sought to keep the document sealed on the grounds it could affect potential jurors for her trial. However, Ghislaine Maxwell will lose bid to ban the deposition from trial, and according to an AP article dated June 25, 2021, quote, 2 2016 depositions of Ghislaine Maxwell in a civil case in which she was repeatedly questioned about financier Jeffrey Epstein's sexual activities can be used at her criminal trial this year over the objections of her lawyers, a judge ruled. U.S. District Judge Allison Nathan in Manhattan rejected the request that she block prosecution from using the interviews of Maxwell at her November sex trafficking trial. Lawyers for the British socialite charged with procuring teenage girls for Epstein to sexually abuse had urged Maxwell only participated in the depositions because she was promised they would be kept secret. Maxwell had been jailed since her arrest last July. The former girlfriend of Epstein had pleaded not guilty to charges that she recruited 4 teenage girls between 1994 and 2004 for Epstein. Epstein, a wealthy financier and convicted sex offender, allegedly killed himself in his cell at a federal Manhattan lockup in August of 2019. Judge Nathan had thrice rejected bail requests, and a federal appeals court has twice agreed that Maxwell should remain incarcerated despite her willingness to pledge a $28.5 million bail package that would include 24-hour armed guards and an offer to reject her British and French citizenship. She is a U.S. citizen as well. In one count, she was charged with lying when she said, "I don't know what you're talking about," when she was asked during the April 2016 deposition whether Epstein had a scheme to recruit underage girls for sexual massages. In another count, she was charged with perjury for saying she did not recall whether she was aware of the presence of sex toys or devices in sexual activities at Epstein's Palm Beach, Florida home, and for saying she wasn't aware whether Epstein was having sexual activities with anyone other than herself. End quote. However, the accusers would come out saying otherwise, that she knew what was going on in Epstein's home.
Rose turned 15. She says things took a turn.
You know, just take your underwear off and get on top. And I said I didn't want to. And he, you know, very forcefully kind of brought me into the table, and I just did what he told me to do. I was really scared. I didn't necessarily think that he was, you know, going to rape me.
Did he hold you there?
Yeah.
No question in your mind, he knew you did not want that to happen.
Oh, yeah. No, he definitely, yeah. There was no way. I was like, I don't want to say I was screaming or anything of that nature, but I was terrified, and I was telling him to stop. Please stop, you know?
And did he?
No, he did not stop. He had no intentions of stopping, and that's what he wanted, that's what he got.
When you left there, you never went back?
After that day, no, I never went back. I was terrified.
Now the prospect of Epstein's shadowy background came to light, and in an article written by the Times of Israel dated December 4th, 2021, they suspected that Epstein did have indeed connections to the Israeli Mossad. Quote, did the now deceased disgraced financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein have links to the Israeli intelligence community? An investigative reporter for the Miami Herald claims that credible details making the link are not far-fetched and need to be explored in further detail and examined. Julie Brown, whose book Perversion of Justice, the Jeffrey Epstein Story, said, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Epstein had connections to the Israeli intelligence community. Robert Maxwell certainly had those kinds of connections, and Epstein had a close relationship with Robert Maxwell. Brown cleanly stresses the striking similarities between Jeffrey Epstein's death in August 2019 and Robert Maxwell's death in November of 1991. The 68-year-old British media mogul was said to have drowned after falling from his luxurious yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, near the Canary Islands. Spanish police insisted no foul play was suspected in Maxwell's death, but rumors about how exactly Maxwell died have never gone away. One theory points to a possible suicide. Another claims Maxwell was assassinated by the Israeli Mossad intelligence agency for which he was secretly working. Maxwell is buried on Jerusalem's Mount of Olives. Many members of the Israeli intelligence community attended his funeral. So too did Yitzhak Shamir, Israel's then prime minister, and Shamir eulogized the British tycoon for the political connections he brought to Israel during the 1980s and for the money he invested in it. 2 years ago, while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges, 66-year-old American financier Epstein was found hanging in a cell in a Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. Since then, numerous theories have swirled about Epstein's true cause of death, making the leap from conspiracy fodder into the cultural mainstream. According to Brown, neither the FBI nor the United States Justice Department have convinced me that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. Why would Epstein give up before he even got to court, Brown asks. She also points to a number of other murky details. Epstein breaking their bones in the neck before he died, and the fact that the two prison guards who were supposed to be keeping a watchful eye on Epstein in his Manhattan jail cell mysteriously fell asleep at the same time. One chapter in Brown's book argues that the complex relationship Jeffrey Epstein had with the Maxwell family may provide further answers. That history stretches back to the mid-1980s when Epstein allegedly began helping Robert Maxwell hide money in numerous offshore bank accounts. Maxwell, a self-made billionaire, was born in Yad Lubik Hyman Binyamin Hock into a poor Yiddish-speaking Orthodox Jewish family in Czechoslovakia in 1923. He went on to become a parliamentary representative for British Labour Party, but the final years of Maxwell's life were plagued by financial trouble and earned him the nickname the Crook of the Century. Maxwell defaulted on $2 billion worth of loans and subsequently raided millions of pounds from the company's retirement fund. even stealing from his own staff's pensions and shares in Britain's Mirror Group as he refused to face his inevitable bankruptcy. Following Maxwell's death 3 decades ago, Epstein became an important figure to certain members of the Maxwell family who were then left bankrupt and riddled with debt. Brown notes, for instance, that Epstein attended an event at New York Plaza's Hotel on November 24, 1991, at which the YVO Institute for Jewish Research paid tribute to Robert Maxwell. The author also speculates that Epstein may have even offered financial assistance to Robert Maxwell's wife Elizabeth when she became a widow. Epstein then became romantically involved with Elizabeth and Robert Maxwell's 9th child, Ghislaine. Known to be her father's favorite child and his most trusted confidant, Ghislaine Maxwell may have been aware of many secrets her father took to the grave relating to the controversial political, financial, and espionage life, believes Brown. End quote. However, the trial continued on for Ghislaine Maxwell.
And this story now wrapping up former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Explain the Barak-Epstein connection here.
Barak received about $2.3 million from the Wexner Foundation, which was a philanthropic organization largely run by Epstein himself in conjunction with somebody who he organized and administered financial consultancy for at the given time. So Barak apparently did research consulting for this particular firm. It's a foundation that advances Jewish professional development, Israeli professional development as well. What exactly did he do for the Wexner Foundation? Nobody really knows. Barak refuses to say. He says it was research related. That research was never published. The Wexner Foundation and obviously Epstein himself are not saying anything either. However, Barak was photographed coming out of the apartment of Epstein in New York in 2016. The work he did for the foundation dates back to 2006. So now we're seeing a trading of barbs between Barak and Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu tweeting, what else beside money, obviously, did that sex criminal, meaning Epstein, give Ehud Barak? Barak responding in kind, saying that it's a shame that people he's been involved with over the course of his life have resorted to criminality. Of course, not only Epstein, but he throws Netanyahu in that mix as well.
This is a major campaign issue now. Barak looking for a political comeback. Polls show he'd make it into the Knesset, maybe be a thorn in Netanyahu's side. Epstein and his relationships with powerful people, it's a campaign issue right now. There wants to be maybe an investigation here.
It is a campaign issue for Barak specifically because we have money floating around that nobody really knows the source of, nobody really knows why it was given to Ehud Barak. And when you're running against Benjamin Netanyahu and running on an anti-corruption platform,
you want to know where the money is.
You want to know where the money's coming from. And the Likud can certainly use this to their advantage when it comes to public perception of a.
With the trial starting up in November, the judge in the Ghislaine Maxwell case issues a media-wide gag order over the trial with no live stream to keep scandalous details from leaking out to the public. Members of the media are allowed to watch Maxwell's trial, but federal courts do not allow cameras like some state courts do, and the discrepancy is fueling confusion and conspiracy theorists on social media. In the lead up to the trial, news that the case would not be live streamed began circulating on social media. Some users compared it to the fully televised Rittenhouse trial. Over the weekend, users claimed that the judge had placed a media gag order on the case and had banned the press from attending. However, reporters and members of the public are able to watch the trial live, both in the courtroom as well as in overflow rooms where it will be streamed for those who don't get a seat, Judge Allison Nathan wrote in a November 24th ruling. An Associated Press reporter was in the courtroom for part of the day on last Monday. Journalists could also be seen waiting in line to get inside the courthouse in photos taken by the Associated Press. The Attorney General's office for the Southern District of New York confirmed in a statement released last Monday that press would be allowed to attend the trial and that there would be no live feeds except those within the courthouse. In addition, no dial-in telephone line will be provided to listen to the proceedings, the office has said. Clearing up many things that are circulating about the trial, and all the conspiracies surrounding the trial began to circulate online. According to an Associated Press article dated November 29th in 2021, quote, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were partners in crime in the sexual abuse of teenage girls, a prosecutor said Monday, while Maxwell's lawyers said she was being made a scapegoat for a man's bad behavior as a British socialite sex trafficking trial got underway in New York. Assistant U.S. Attorney Lara Pomerantz said at the start of Maxwell's sex trafficking trial that the British socialite and Epstein enticed girls as young as 14 to engage in so-called massages in which sex abuse came to be seen as casual and normal after vulnerable victims were showered with money and gifts. The prosecutor sought to make clear to a jury of 12 that there was no confusion about whether Maxwell, Epstein's longtime companion, was his puppet or accomplice. She described Maxwell as central to Epstein's sex abuse scheme, which prosecutors say lasted over a decade. She was in on it from the start. The defendant and Epstein lured their victims with a promise of a bright future, only to sexually exploit them, Pomerantz said, as U.S. District Attorney Damien Williams looked on from a spectator bench. Maxwell was involved in every detail of Epstein's life, the prosecutor said. The defendant was the lady of the house. Even after Maxwell and Epstein stopped being romantically involved, the pair remained the best of friends, Pomerantz said. She also said Maxwell helped normalize abusive sexual conduct by making the teenagers feel safe, by taking them on shopping trips and asking them about their lives, their schools, and their families. When she finished, attorney Bobby Schennerheim said her client was a scapegoat for a man who behaved badly, just like so many women all the way back to Adam and Eve. She's not Jeffrey Epstein. She's not like Jeffrey Epstein or any of the powerful men, moguls, and media giants who abuse women, Steinheim said. She also called Epstein the proverbial elephant in the room. Pomerantz said the abuse occurred at Epstein's homes, including his estate in Palm Beach, Florida, his posh Manhattan townhouse in Santa Fe, New Mexico, ranch, a Paris apartment, and a luxury estate in the Virgin Islands. The government's first witness was Lawrence Paul Visconti Jr., who worked for Epstein starting in the 1990s as a pilot on the private jets that shuttled Epstein, Maxwell, and others between his various homes. A prosecutor had Veskin start by describing the layout of the New York residence that he regularly visited to pick up luggage and do other chores. He was to return to the stand on last Tuesday. Authorities charged Maxwell in July of 2020, arresting her after tracking her to a $1 million New Hampshire estate where she had been holed up during the coronavirus pandemic. End quote. The trials would begin to bring in numerous witnesses throughout the week, including past victims and a pilot.
The trial began today for Ghislaine Maxwell. She's the longtime confidant of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Prosecutors claiming Maxwell helped Epstein by recruiting and grooming his underage victims. NBC News correspondent for Investigations Tom Winter is live at the courthouse in New York. Tom, opening statements this afternoon. What charges does Maxwell face? What did attorneys say to the jury?
Right, opening statements and our first witness as well, Kate. So it started out with a little bit of a delay today with the jury getting seated, some logistical issues, and the jurors are actually going to be told that with the exception of the day before Christmas Eve and the day before New Year's Eve, they're going to be sitting through this trial for the next 6 weeks. 6 counts that Maxwell faces, including sex trafficking conspiracy, the sex trafficking of a minor, as well as conspiracy to entice minors. And that was one of the key things that the prosecutor who delivered the opening statement, Assistant United States Attorney Lara Pomerantz, focused on, particularly the 14-year-old underage victim that they say was involved with Epstein and with Maxwell when they recruited her from an art camp when she was, just as I said, 14 years old. They said that that summer camp turned into a nightmare. They detailed the allegations involving the 3 other alleged victims in this case, going into detail about the types of evidence and witnesses they expect to call, including including obviously those 4 women, but also some of Epstein's former employees. And that takes us to the person who's on the stand now, and Larry Vysotsky, who's one of Epstein's longtime jet pilots. So he was one of the people that was involved in flying that now infamous Boeing 727. Just before coming out here, Kate, he testified that he did his best to try to record some of the names of who were on those flights, but in fact, he did not record all of them, particularly when they were domestic flights, and he didn't actually, was not actually rather required by law to record those names. Now, how's Maxwell's side responding? Well, in her opening statements, defense attorney Bobby Sternheim coming out and saying, look, this is going right after the victim's credibility here, Kate, being very specific that this is about 3 things. 1, the memory of these victims. The charges here go back to 1994, or the conduct, I should say, goes back to 1994 to 2004. She said that memory could be contaminated by information that's come out since this case was initially charged, since the plethora of news coverage has come out, the intense media news coverage of what Epstein and Maxwell allegedly did has come out. And she also focused on the idea of money, saying that all of these alleged victims retained civil counsel and reached settlements over millions of dollars in the case of all 4 combined. So she really focused on the victims and says that the evidence here just doesn't support their claims. Prosecutors obviously already addressing that in their opening statement, saying no, in fact, there's going to be a lot of corroborating evidence that they intend to offer that backs up the statements from these 4 alleged victims. So that's where things stand now. We should wrap up here in the next 10 minutes or so. I fully expect that the pilot, Larry Vysotsky, will be back on the stand tomorrow, Kate, to face cross-examination and continue direct examination. One little note, he's being questioned by Maureen Comey, the daughter of former FBI Director James Comey, who's worked at this U.S. Attorney's Office for some time, continuing a family tradition of working for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. So that's what's happened here. A slow start to the day, but things certainly got busy later this afternoon.
Vysotsky took to the stand and started naming names. He revealed a laundry list of celebrities who were allegedly guests on Epstein's private planes, which included Kevin Spacey. Vysotsky said Kevin Spacey was a passenger on Epstein's plane. Separately, Spacey has also been accused of sexually assaulting minors in multiple lawsuits. One was filed by actor Anthony Rapp and another plaintiff, who both alleged that the Oscar-winning Spacey assaulted them in separate incidents when they were just 14. Another name was comedian and actor Chris Tucker, who was once aboard Epstein's plane. In 2005, Tucker testified in Michael Jackson's child molestation trial and called the accuser cunning. Tucker was called to the stand by Jackson's defense team. He was really smart, and he was cunning at times, and his brother was definitely cunning, Tucker said of the young boy at the time. Jackson was later acquitted. Prince Andrew. Vysotsky also named Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Senators George Mitchell and John Glenn, including legendary violinist Itzhak Perlman, as passengers. Britain's Prince Andrew, Queen Elizabeth's second son, was listed as a passenger on Epstein's jet multiple times. Virginia Guffey, who said she was flown around on Epstein's plane with Maxwell when she was a teenager, claimed she was sexually assaulted by Prince Andrew. The British family member, Andrew, denies the allegations. However, there was more to come. The trial lasted on, and the first of 4 women described as key accusers in the indictment against Maxwell testified just this Tuesday that Maxwell was often in the room when the witness was just 14 and who had sexual interactions with the financier, Jeffrey Epstein. Prosecutors went to the heart of the sex trafficking case against Maxwell with their second witness, a woman in her early 40s who was introduced to jurors as Jane, a pseudonym she said she prefers in part to protect a 22-year acting career. During sexual encounters that began in 1994 and continued to 97, Maxwell was very casual, she told the New York City jury, like it was no big deal. The witness testified in a quiet but steady voice. Although she got choked up twice, she also dabbed at her nose with a tissue as she described the sexual encounters. She also largely avoided looking at Maxwell, except when she pointed an index finger when she was asked to identify her. Maxwell maintained a steady gaze in the witness's direction, occasionally writing notes that she was passed to her lawyers. The witness first met Epstein and Maxwell in 1994 when she was attending a music camp in pursuit of a singing career, she said. She said she was eating ice cream with friends when Maxwell approached with a Yorkshire Terrier, drawing her attention. After her friends left, she spoke with Epstein, who then arrived and introduced himself as a donor. They discovered that they both lived in Palm Beach, Florida. The woman and her mother soon received an invitation to Epstein's home, and although her mother was not included in the subsequent invites, she remained very impressed and enamored with the wealth and affluence, and she believed that Maxwell and Epstein must really think her daughter was special. Soon, Epstein and Maxwell were taking her shopping for clothes, including underwear from Victoria's Secret, and asking about her life and her father's sudden death in a way that didn't happen at home, where soul-searching conversations never occurred, she said. The cycle of abuse started when Epstein abruptly took her hand one day and said, "Follow me," before taking her to a pool house at the home. Then he pulled down his pants, pulled her close, and proceeded to masturbate. She was frozen in fear, she said. Other encounters included sex toys or turned on into oral sex orgies with other young women, said Maxwell. On cross-examination, defense lawyers Loring Menninger immediately attacked the witness's credibility, asking her why she waited over 20 years to report the alleged abuse by Maxwell to law enforcement, and why she brought 2 personal injury lawyers along to her first meeting with the FBI. Maxwell was beginning to concentrate on the issues of attacking the credibility of the defendants, including all the accused sex abusers. However, there was other witnesses at play, including former employees of the Epstein estate.
Now to the sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. Today, day 4, the focus shifted to Jeffrey Epstein's mansion in Palm Beach, Florida. It may have seemed like a paradise, but one witness painting a much different picture of what it was like inside those walls. News 4's Erica Byfield is live in Lower Manhattan with what we learned in court today. Erica.
Hi, Adam. Well, this man told the jurors that he worked for Jeffrey Epstein for 12 years. He said in the house he noticed this, that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell kept these little black books full of numbers, addresses, and names of very important people. He also said this, that Maxwell made it very clear to him that she was second in command. From the day she came to the house and took over, she told me that she was the lady of the house. That's how a man who worked for Ghislaine Maxwell described her, saying that the British socialite would be extremely demanding, telling him she wanted Jeffrey Epstein's 6-bedroom, 10-bathroom home in Palm Beach, Florida to operate like a 5-star hotel. On the 4th day of Maxwell's trial, he told the jury that she ran a tight ship, created a 50-plus page manual of checklists. One entry read, "Remember that you see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing, except to answer a question directed at you. Also, never look Epstein in the eyes." That was the environment the prosecutors say that Maxwell and Epstein created as they preyed on kids. The feds say that Maxwell groomed young girls for the now deceased Epstein, a charge that her defense team says is completely false. The court case involves 4 accusers. One woman, only identified as Jane, testified earlier in the week, saying that the pair abused her at 14. On Thursday, the house manager said that he saw Jane at Epstein's home many times. In fact, he says he drove her there himself. He also reported seeing another young girl that he thought was underage, Virginia Roberts, a woman who has publicly said that she was abused too. The house manager said that he was there the day that Maxwell met her, invited her to Epstein's waterfront home. She looked young, long blonde hair, had on a white uniform. She came to the home very often. So that house manager also mentioned this. He stopped working for Jeffrey Epstein in 2002. He says to the jury that he actually came back once to that house. That was 2 years later. He said that day he broke into Jeffrey Epstein's home and he stole a lot of money. He says later Jeffrey Epstein confronted him with a picture of himself and they agreed that that would be a loan between the two of them. He says Jeffrey Epstein never filed any charges in this case. You can bet that is an issue that'll be brought up under cross-examination when he has to sit before the defense tomorrow. In Lower Manhattan, Erica Byfield, News 4, New York.
You're right about that, Erica. Okay, thank you.
Well, Jackie, Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers really spent the morning here trying to undermine the very damning allegations made by Juan Alessi, the manager, as you said, of Jeffrey Epstein's Palm Beach mansion, who claimed in his testimony that Ghislaine Maxwell did entice underage girls to the house to massage Jeffrey Epstein, and that she did take them on flights to other of Epstein's properties in the US. Allegations that really go to the heart of this trial, and allegations that Ghislaine Maxwell herself denies. And I should warn viewers, there are some details in my report they may find distressing.
Becky, step away, please.
He covered his face with a mask and dark sunglasses, but this is Juan Alessi, who managed Jeffrey Epstein's Florida mansion for 12 years and who says that Ghislaine Maxwell was at the center of everything that happened there. Did Miss Maxwell instruct you to pick up the young girls? Do you regret working for Mr. Epstein?
No comment.
He had no comment last night, but Alessi had earlier told a Manhattan court that the sprawling home in Palm Beach was run by him, but Maxwell made clear that she was the boss. He testified, "From the day she took over, she mentioned to me that she would be the lady of the house." That lady now stands accused of grooming and trafficking underage girls for sexual abuse by Mr. Epstein, including inside the Palm Beach mansion. In Mr. Alessi's testimony, he claimed he was instructed by Maxwell to pick up a young girl, identified only as Jane, from her school in Palm Beach and bring her to Epstein's house. Jane testified earlier in the week that she was abused by Epstein and Maxwell from the age of 14, starting in Palm Beach. Alessi also claimed he was driving the car when Maxwell saw another young girl, Virginia Jeffrey, and was made to pull over so Maxwell could invite her back to the Florida home. Jeffrey was 15 at the time and has previously claimed Maxwell groomed her to have sex with rich and powerful men, including Prince Andrew, an allegation the prince denies, and neither he nor Jeffrey are part of this trial. Maxwell's lawyers have sought to describe her and Epstein as friends, but in court, Alessi insisted the two were a couple and even showed the jury their shared bedroom on the floor plan of the Palm Beach house. Maxwell even drew up this 56-page household manual, giving staff strict instructions on everything from the distance between hangers in the wardrobe to Jeffrey Epstein's preferred brand of cough sweets, down to the precise number of seconds to warm up their breakfast coffee in the microwave. Alessi made clear that Ghislaine Maxwell was in charge of every single aspect of life in Palm Beach. The manual instructed them to anticipate the needs of Mr. Epstein and Ms. Maxwell, including this one, to place $100 in the glove compartment of each car, a fact the prosecutors chose to highlight in court. At one point, Alessi claimed he several times discovered sex toys when cleaning up after Epstein's massages. That echoed testimony from the witness Jane, who claimed Epstein used sex toys on her during the massages she says she was paid to give him. Alessi said he returned the toys to Maxwell's closet because that, he said, is where he was told they were kept. Ghislaine Maxwell denies all the charges against her. Well, Maxwell's lawyers really did try very hard to try and undermine Alessi, but I have to say he stood his ground. He was even feisty at times. They kept trying to make him say that at all times it was Epstein who was in charge, not Maxwell. In one exchange about maintenance on the property, the lawyers suggested to Alessi that he would go to Epstein for instructions, but Alessi, he snapped back, "No, I would go to Miss Maxwell. She was my immediate superior. I would go to her first." And on the point of women coming to give massages in the house, which Alessi said happened as many as 3 times a day, the lawyer asked him if anybody ever complained to him. Alessi said no, they didn't, but then he added, "I wish they would have, because then I would have done something to stop it."
Siobhan, thanks very much.
Which brings us to the current day, in which prosecutors showed to the jury a green folding massage table used by financier Jeffrey Epstein, and it was set up in front of the jury to bolster allegations he teamed up with British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell to exploit the underage victims. The theatrical flourish in federal court in Manhattan, courtesy of an investigator wearing rubber gloves, was meant to corroborate testimony from a key accuser at Maxwell's sex abuse trial, alleging massages were used as a pretense for the sexual encounters with Epstein that sometimes included Maxwell herself. The witness, who said the abuse started when she was 14, described seeing a massage table in a massage room that police say was in the same location where they recovered one at Epstein's Palm Beach, Florida mansion in 2005. A police officer testified that investigators also seized records, computers, and sex toys, and a photo of which was shown to the jury from the residence. Prosecutors showed jurors a police videotape of the residence that captured images of nude photos on the walls, decor that federal prosecutors claim is proof of a sexualized atmosphere encouraged by Maxwell to put pressure on the victims. The evidence was presented over defense objections, calling it prejudicial. Defense attorney Bobby Steinham accused prosecutors of trying to unfairly depict Epstein's home as a domicile of debauchery, in which it was. The accuser, using the pseudonym Jane, testified earlier the week that when she first visited the Epstein home, she was disturbed by some paintings of naked women or half-naked women, and also seeing the green massage table. Also, early on today, former Epstein housekeeper Alessi returned to the witness stand to face cross-examination over his testimony that Jane and another woman who accused Epstein of sexually abusing her as a teen were repeated visitors at the Palm Beach mansion where Maxwell was the lady of the house. Alessi claimed earlier today that none of the many young women who visited the Florida home alerted him to any misconduct. I wish they would have, because I would have done something, he said. And now, what to expect in future trial dates. I suspect more victims, more unfortunate names, and more people who are on the flight logs. Will they be protected? And to the people who associated with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, to the financiers, the lawyers, the provocateurs, the intelligence assets, and even world leaders, will they be held accountable for the crimes that they committed by venturing on Epstein's planes and going to as many homes around the world and engaging in illicit sex with underage girls? Time will only tell.